Okay, so good evening and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. Apologies again for the late change to the start time, for obvious reasons with the government announcements today. Obviously some positive announcements for the country and for grassroots sports, which we're all obviously delighted about. But just before we move on, in terms of obviously some positive news, it's needless to say, our thoughts do go out to everyone that has been affected by COVID. I'm conscious that we've got individuals and clubs on the call this evening who've been affected by COVID, and our thoughts go out to everyone who's been affected by the pandemic. Just looking down the list, fantastic to see people on here tonight from all over Staffordshire, but not just all over Staffordshire. We've got people from slightly further afield in different parts of the UK as well. And also we've got one or two people from overseas joining us from the United States and China. So great to have people from different parts of the globe as well as different parts of the county on here. Fantastic to see lots of familiar faces, people we've worked with on the pitch improvement programme for a number of years now, but also we've got quite a few new faces on the call tonight, which is great to see. My colleague Kevin Staples, who I think most of you probably know, is going to be coordinating the slides this evening. So Kevin, if I can ask you to just move on to the next one, please. So yeah, first of all, obviously welcome to Microsoft Teams. I think we're probably all fairly familiar now with online meetings. It seems to be something we've all had to endure and embrace over the last few months. But for those of us who joined the last pitch improvement workshop last year, the feedback off the back of that one was very positive, and hopefully the same will happen this evening. And something we have discussed, that if tonight does prove to be useful and informative, we do want to keep it fairly informal tonight, but if you do find it useful, then there's no reason we couldn't repeat these question and answer sessions a little bit more often throughout the different seasons of the year. Obviously it is a Teams meeting, so apologies in advance if there's any background noises. Hopefully we can try and keep those to a minimum. But obviously apologies in advance for any issues we have on the technology front. We're recording tonight's workshop, so again, any of your colleagues who couldn't make tonight's workshop but may be interested in this subject, we'll send you a copy of the recording and the slides for them to watch, or for you to watch back at your leisure. Hopefully, well, we've planned for this to last for approximately 1 hour. Obviously, if everything is going very well and some really good questions are coming in, then we will keep going, but we're conscious that we don't want to keep you all evening, so we will try and keep this within the hour, depending how many questions come from the floor. Like I mentioned, microphones will keep muted other than the panel tonight, just to try and keep background noise to a minimum. But later on, we may potentially open up the option of some questions verbally as well. So we'll see how we get on. And again, the cameras are purely optional, so feel free to leave them on or turn them off. Likewise, when you're asking questions later, then as I say, feel free to leave them on or turn them off. Okay, on to the next slide. Thanks, Kevin. So in terms of asking questions this evening, hopefully on your screen you can see the chat box feature that looks similar to the one on the slide. At any point during the evening that you have a question that you'd like to ask, please feel free to pop it into the chat box. If for any reason you're struggling with the chat box, or you'd simply prefer to send your question via email, then please do that and send it via email to myself at my email address, and I shall monitor that during the course of the evening as well. And hopefully we'll cover quite a wide range of topics throughout the evening that are relevant to everyone. And then just in terms of who we've got answering questions this evening, so the bulk of the questions will be answered by the people on the screen. So many of you will be familiar with our two pitch advisors, Kevin Duffield and Andy Jackson. Kevin from the Grounds Management Association, formerly the IOG, has been involved now in our programme since 2014. And going even further back, Andy has been involved in our programme since 2012. So loads of experience, not just obviously in pitch improvement, pitch maintenance, but two people who are now very knowledgeable about the county and grassroots football in Staffordshire too. And without wanting to embarrass them too much, both of them have been a fantastic resource to Staffordshire FA, and I'm delighted that they're still involved in the programme and on this call this evening. And then joining Kevin and Andy from the Staffordshire FA are Kevin and myself. So Kevin has, amongst many roles at Staffordshire FA, has a big focus on the improvement of all facilities across the county, and obviously pitches being an important part of those facility improvements. And myself, as the Partnerships and Communications Officer, my role very much involves supporting Kevin on the improvement of grass pitches as well, something I've been involved in for a number of years. So hopefully, for those that have known us for a while, you'll appreciate that all four of us have got a significant passion for trying to improve natural turf pitches across the county, both in the short term and the longer term. And hopefully events like tonight can give you a little bit more guidance in terms of how you can potentially do that for your own facility. Okay, and just to mention, for those of you, again, who've been involved in our programme for a number of years, particularly the workshops that we've delivered, you'll be aware that on a regular basis over the years, we've had two companies supporting the work we do in Campy Turf Care Systems and Rigby Taylor. Campy from a machinery and equipment point of view, and Rigby Taylor from a products point of view, particularly around seed, paint, fertiliser and other products. We've had an informal relationship now for a number of years with Campy and Rigby Taylor as really valuable partners to our programme and the work that clubs are doing out on the ground. And we've now formalised that. So for those unaware, Campy and Rigby Taylor are now our official partners, if you like, our recommended partners. So for any clubs who are looking to embrace machinery or products in the short or longer term, then we have a couple of companies now who are supporting the programme on hand. They're also on hand this evening, so should any technical questions come up around machinery or products that the panel can't answer, then we'll ask John and Glenn if they can potentially give us the answers to those questions, or possibly follow up past this meeting. And then the bottom logo on there, Dennis and Sysis, based just outside of the county, over in Ashbourne in Derbyshire. Again, have been great supporters of the work that we've been trying to do. They work very closely with Campy Turf Care in terms of Campy distribute a lot of Dennis and Sysis equipment. Probably the most popular item of equipment for grassroots clubs would be the Sysis quadruplay. We've seen a number of clubs, both locally and nationally at grassroots level, investing in that piece of equipment, but also other items of equipment produced by Dennis and Sysis in terms of slitters, spikers, pedestrian mowers. So I'm delighted that Dennis and Sysis have come on board as well to help support our programme. So three people from the world of pitch maintenance, not only locally, nationally, but also globally, and we're delighted to have all three on board supporting the work that we do. Okay, next slide, please, Kevin. And just some numbers to paint a bit of a picture of where we're currently at in terms of the pitch improvement programme in Staffordshire. So as touched upon, when we first started this programme with Andy back in 2012, it's taken on a bit of a life of its own. We're delighted that the GMA got involved, and we have a second pitch advisor in Kevin Duffield. And since we started that programme, we visited 116 different clubs, and in total have done 184 visits and followed them up with reports off the back of them. And that equates to 326 pitches in Staffordshire that have been impacted by this programme. It's a number we're really proud of, 326, but as you can see from the number below, the total number of pitches that we have in Staffordshire, we've still got a long way to go when it comes to improving all of the pitches, or as many pitches as we possibly can across the county. And just for info, underneath in the red is a breakdown of that 1,138 pitches, so you can see where they fall under which sector. And as you can probably appreciate, it's sometimes a little bit tricky for us to get the education sector and local authorities to really embrace what we're doing. But I think slowly but surely we are chipping away at that, in addition to all the work that we've done with the club sites owned by clubs and other football organisations. We've seen some fantastic results over the last few years, but as I say, we're conscious that we want to not rest on our laurels and keep improving not only those numbers, but more importantly, the services that are being impacted by the programme. Okay, thanks, Kevin. And then just off the back of tonight, for anyone who's not aware of some of the other additional online support which is available to grassroots clubs, both the GMA and the Football Foundation have additional online resources which can be very valuable for grassroots clubs. I'll ask Kevin in a second to just provide a little bit more information around the GMA toolkit and also the GMA online courses, which I know a number of people on this course have taken already and have enjoyed. And also in addition to that, the Football Foundation groundskeeping community app and the Pitch Power app, which is fairly recent development. But just before we move on, Kevin Duffel, are you okay just to provide a little bit more information on those items on screen, please?
Yeah, sure, Gareth. The toolkit started life quite a long time ago as the Sport England groundsmanship.co.uk website, but it's been completely overhauled. And in addition to football, there's cricket, rugby union, and rugby league. So I think it's a great reference point, actually, and particularly for anyone who's kind of trying to sort of ease their way into volunteering and helping. It's a great way of getting folk up to speed reasonably quickly, ahead of then perhaps looking to go on one of the online courses, which have proved to be very popular. So I'm just looking now nationally, over 700 or 750 have completed the online level 1 over the last several months since it was launched, and about 80 actually have completed the level 2. So it's proving very, very popular, which is, I guess, just as well since we can't undertake face-to-face courses. So I would encourage. Well, some of you will be sort of asked to undertake those courses anyway because of the various grant conditions. So Hive, nationally, I think we've got about 2,000 users. It's a very active community. For those of you who haven't had a look, it's well worth dipping in and out. And again, it's actually got a lot of great resource, which is updated on a fairly regular basis. So, for example, a colleague of mine just did a bit of a survey around record keeping for rainfall and temperature and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's always something sort of fairly topical within it, in addition to the sort of chit chat that you would expect a sort of groundskeeping community to sort of undertake. And that last one there, for some of you, you will probably not want to see any reference to pitch power, but nevertheless, I was just having a very, very quick look, Gareth, in addition to all those reports that you referred to, since Pitch Powers launched, we're over 40 submissions and reports for the county, which is, I hadn't realised it was quite that high actually. So, many thanks to all of you who've sort of contributed to that, because I know it's obviously new for everybody. It isn't easy. It can be really time consuming. If you've got a large multi-pitch site, it can be especially time consuming. So we're very grateful for the effort that everybody puts in. And it really does contribute to the sort of the wider development of the programme, and in particular, where to start to direct funding. So it's highly relevant for all sorts of reasons. And hopefully, for those of you who've received the report, it does build on a lot of the guidance that we've provided hitherto. So it's a massive development for the Football Foundation and the FA. It's very significant investment. Just to give you a sense of scale, since its inception, I referenced the number of submissions and reports, but since its inception, it's enabled the FA and the Foundation to sort of revisit, as it were, about 3,000 pitches nationally. So it's a great way of extending reach of the programme. That's not to say that the sort of face-to-face element will disappear. That's all being looked at the same time, but clearly with a pandemic, this was a very good way of continuing to support clubs and provide them with some sort of advice and guidance. The final point that I would want to make relates to GMA's Grounds Week, which is next week. There is lots and lots floating around in sort of social media. But essentially, during next week, we're going to try and really recognise the efforts of grounds folk at all levels, from professional to volunteer, and across a whole range of sports. So it's worth looking out for. The GMA website and, as I say, the various social media posts contain a few more details, but it'll start to become fairly obvious what's sort of happening when. So that's probably all I wanted to say around that, Gareth.
Super. No, I really appreciate that, Kevin. And just before we move on from that slide, certainly some of those resources clubs have told us. I know on this call tonight we're preaching to the converted a little bit in terms of groundskeeping, but a club told us that they've used some of these resources to actually encourage other volunteers within their organisation to get involved. So it may be, if you haven't already shared some of the resources that are out there in terms of particularly the groundskeeping community and also the toolkit, I think they can potentially be used as a good opportunity to try and encourage other volunteers to get involved, or if they're already involved, just some additional learning for them as well. So yeah, hopefully lots to get your teeth stuck into in terms of additional online support. Okay, next slide please, Kevin. And just before we move on to the main part of the evening, the question and answers, just some important messages to reiterate around ensuring that people follow the government guidance in terms of what we can and can't do when it comes to maintaining pitches. The GMA regularly updates their website in terms of COVID-19, and I'm sure that will be the case again off the back of today's announcements. And again, in terms of the next few points around health and safety and working out on your pitches, whether it be on your own or within a team. Again, Kevin, whilst I've got you, would you be happy to just provide a little bit more context on some of those bullet points just from a GMA point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Interestingly, we've just gone through a process of revisiting all of the health and safety, essentially risk assessments. So that is something to kind of watch out for. So those are, as it were, more generic risk assessments over and above anything to do with COVID. But yeah, always keep referring to what we're doing around that, and the general label we have for that is sort of back to play. So you know, for very many of us, you know, that's going to be very relevant over the next well, as of now, really. So I think the other point I'd highlight, because I was always a bit probably not as, I think with the job I've got now, I'm much more conscious of the implications of lone working. I think when I was, you know, not doing what I'm doing and sort of operating more as a volunteer, I perhaps ought to have taken on board a little bit about, you know, what you should do in terms of just communicating where you've gone, what you're doing, and all the rest of it, just in case you know, something, you know, untoward happens. Many of us are operating in actually really quite large sites, so I think I'd certainly highlight the lone working, and of course, even if we're volunteering, any club that we're associated with, there are all the usual kind of responsibilities in terms of safety at work and all that sort of thing. So probably don't want to get too hung up on all that stuff, bit serious and everything, but it is important. And I think, you know, I know what it's going to be like. Everyone's going to be wanting to get out there and trying to do as much as they can, as you know, as within the time available, and it could get a bit pressurized, but it's important that we sort of factor all of this into the equation. You know, some of the best advice I ever got was sort of realizing when it's best to just stay put and have a cup of tea and think about it, rather than kind of diving in and then, you know, potentially thinking, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all. But that will be it, I think. Unless Andy, you got anything to say around that, particularly the sort of health and safety side of it?
Yeah, I think you just got to be conscious and careful, because we're dealing with, most of the jobs are dealing with machinery. For instance, if we have lone working, we'll supply the lads with radios and that, and so if there ever was an accident, the radio automatically bings that it's an emergency, and you can get paramedics on site quite quickly and things like that. But I think communication's the biggest key, and we also do a policy where they've got someone to ring every 15 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes, just to check that they're okay. And it's just like you say, Kevin, it's the whereabouts on site, just making sure that you tell people where you are on site, just in case.
No, thanks both. And as Kevin alluded to, some really good updates on this area on the GMA website, as well as in the courses for those doing the courses. So some valuable information. Okay, on to the next slide. So yeah, the bulk of the evening now, really, the questions. So as I say, if you've got any questions over the course of the next half an hour or so that you'd like to ask, please feel free to either pop them in the chat box or send me an email. And as mentioned earlier, if time allows, we will invite attendees to raise their hands at the end and ask questions verbally if you'd prefer to ask questions that way. But ahead of tonight, in the emails that I sent out to everyone, I invited people, should they wish to submit any questions that they've got around any burning issues they've got with their own sites, and we've had quite a few come in. So before we move on to covering any questions that come in via the chat or email, we'll touch upon those that have come in over the last few days. So Kevin, if you can move on to the next page, please, and what I'll ask Kevin and Andy predominantly to do is work our way through these questions initially. There are a couple on the next page that probably fall on the County FA and myself and Kevin a little bit more, but certainly this first page I think is predominantly for the two of you. So if you're happy to pick these up from the top, the first one which came in, we actually had two questions very similar, so apologies to somebody else who asked this same question if your question doesn't appear. This first question was asked in a very similar manner by two clubs. So on our pitch, we have one area that gets very boggy and waterlogged very easily, but not the whole pitch. Are there any suggestions on how to improve this one area with little or no budget? So Kevin and Andy, I'll hand over to you for any thoughts you've got on that first question, please.
Well, you've confused me because you've said it's come from two clubs, because I reckoned I'd second guess where it might have come from, but nevertheless, it can be for a variety of reasons, and often if you think about where lots of our grounds are located, it might reflect the history in terms of there could be there could have been landfill. There could have been, it could have been sort of almost, especially around the potteries, it could have been a legacy from the Industrial Revolution. So therefore, the nature of the soil profile could vary enormously from one end of the pitch to the other. That's often a reason. And in certainly one of the examples that I'm aware of at the moment, the differences are actually really stark, and it does seem to be linked to what's underneath. So it might be that a bit of exploratory digging is needed, to try and work out exactly what might be going on. Also, I mean, I think I always, even when I'm out and about, or when I was out and about doing my visits, you'd spot a few things, and I'd often just have a chat with some of the locals and see if they can shed any light on the history of a site. How long has football been played on it? What do we know about it? Any history of floods, any history of streams being diverted underneath the pitch. Sometimes we can get rising groundwater, which is that's a belter when you get that. So the water is essentially coming from underneath, where the water table starts to get very high. So there really are, it's difficult to be a little bit definitive. So those sorts of wider site factors, and then we can start to look at how have we got on as far as our maintenance is concerned? Have we deep aerated? If we did, when did we last do it? What method did we use? Are we able to slit it a fair amount? So, we'd need to address quite a lot of questions around the maintenance as well. And over time, we can sort of start to rule out certain factors and start to home in on what might be causing the problem. I mean, you like a high water table, Andy, don't you?
Yeah, I was just making some notes before you were speaking about this question, and as you were speaking, I was taking off what I'd wrote, so you were stealing the limelight a little bit.
That's why I shut up.
So no, but I think looking at it, and depending where the site is, I've experienced blue clay, things like that. So you've got, I think the first thing is try and rule out some simple things: the thatch, compaction, see where the clay level is. I've certainly experienced areas on drained pitches at our training ground, fully drained, and we've had areas probably 2 meters by 4 meters where they're completely wet. It doesn't matter what you do with them, and underneath, about 8 to 10 inches down, was blue clay. So we had to take it out, unfortunately, so because you can't do a lot with it. But I think in the assessment, you've got to look at the flood maps, the water tables, And this year the water table's been extremely high, and I think that a lot of the sites around the potteries have been really struggling with that. But looking at the pitches this last couple of weeks, the water table seems to be going down quite a bit, to be honest. But I think you need to do the inspections first, and then hopefully you'll try and find the problem. But it's how you rectify the problem then.
One of these, the club's asked as a follow-up question, but I suppose when you talk about limited budget, it probably wouldn't be applicable, as to whether or not it's worth verti-draining that one area with a view to then topping up those holes with some top dressing to create mini drains purely on that one area. Is that something you'd recommend, or is that something that
depending on the profile, Gareth? If it's quite free draining underneath, yes, that's fine. But if you've got a clay layer which is sitting there, all you're going to do is store the water. You're not going to really achieve anything, because you're just going to still store the water. And if you verti-drain the pitches over the last 2 to 3 months, you'd have probably made quite a bit of a mess of the pitches in terms of making the water table even higher, to be honest, and made a more readily available for the rainfall to getting into the profile. Each site's got different. There's some sites in Staffordshire they've got gravel slits and drains in. You know, I'd be highly recommending sort of the shock waving and things like that, which are good. But these systems are designed in winter to be for the water to run to the nearest slit, gravel slit, sand slit, or drain. But if you've got no drains in it at all, and there's no clay there, you could certainly do that, Gareth. It would help a little bit, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Super. Thanks. Well, with all of these questions tonight, for the people who've posed them, if you've got any follow-up questions off the back of it, obviously please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll try and point you in the right direction with the options available. But we won't dwell too long on each question, conscious we want to get through as many as possible. So we'll move on to number 2. And with the potential return of grassroots football, which is obviously very timely with today's announcements, what can potentially be done before then? And a couple of sub-questions to that. Can we seed now, or is it too early? And can we fertilise? And if so, what mix would be recommended? So I assume all of those questions are probably falling under can they be done, or what can be done before what effectively we're now working to March the 29th. Do
you want to start, Kevin, or I'm more than happy to start? I think it depends on your site and what you've got. For me, every site's different, so I'd certainly be trying to, over the next course, once the growing season starts, which will hopefully be in a few weeks' time, I'll be trying to keep it quite clean on top, and the sort of the thatch layer in the bottom of the plant. If you've got any rake on site, just trying to keep it clean, really. And probably not putting too much flush growth on there. I think, Kevin, you were talking the other day about sort of slitting the pitches as well, wasn't you?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of considerations, really, and one of them is utilisation. How heavily are we going to be utilising, the pitches? And linked to that is also soil temperature. We've all probably recognised that the temperatures are starting to increase. There's always a bit of a lag, especially with clay soils. So the sort of temperatures we're seeing on the news might take a little bit of time to translate into into sort of soil temperature. So I definitely, I mean, it's almost linked to the next question as well. I'd looking to put holes in the ground, slitting if I've got one, so that we're getting air into the soil, so the temperature starts to warm up. And depending on, as I was saying, current levels of grass cover, etc., then you're going to, if you can get some soil in the ground, it's probably a good thing. I wouldn't use all my seed now, got to say. I'd be spreading that over the next sort of few months, if I'm honest. But certainly getting some in the ground now in the high wear areas I'm concerned about, I think would be a very good thing to do. Fertilization, we don't want to go. We don't want to be too aggressive. So if your farmer friend down the road is offering you a good deal on 2010, just be slightly measured in how you respond to it. Otherwise, your fuel bill's going to go through the roof, and you're going to be spending a lot of time mowing. So just in terms of fertilization, it's just be slightly careful about what we use, the N level, so the nitrogen component, and we want to sort of give it some help, but sort of gentle help.
Thanks both. And just on seed and fertiliser, obviously we mentioned earlier about our partnership with Rigby Taylor. Any questions, any technical questions around seed, fertiliser, then obviously please feel free to ask them. Over the next few days, weeks and months, no doubt, we'll, from the Staffordshire FA channels, be communicating more information around Rigby Taylor products, obviously very important this time of year. So hopefully that's answered that question, but any technical questions as a follow-up, then please get in touch. And Kevin, as you touched upon the next one, links in a little bit. A club have just invested in a slitter and have never used one before, and are asking when is the best time to slit. Now they've asked it also how often do they sand after slitting. Now I'm conscious normally with the clubs that we work with at this level and the budgets, people don't have hundreds and hundreds of tons of top dressing, so I'm aware that may be an issue in terms of answering that question, and also a question around mowing before or after slitting. So a few questions within that question, but fantastic news that they've now got a slitter that they can do slitting with in-house. Are you able to summarise the rest of the question, if possible?
I mean, having a slitter is one of the it's a super bit of kit, makes a big difference. It isn't necessary to to sort of spread sand every time, because, as you said, Gareth, most of the time we haven't got the budget. So the key thing at the moment is doing the slitting and getting some aeration and starting to, as I say, get air in the profile. In terms of very often, it might be if I've got a trailed slitter, I could be mowing and slitting at the same time. I'm doing two operations in one, perhaps. But if I separate the operations, I'm probably going to do me mowing first, to be honest. But it's I think in a volunteer context, it's needs must. And the point there about goal areas. The first step is to try and get the levels back. Just try and get them repaired with some sort of suitable root zone. I would say, Andy, what's your take on do you mow first and slit after, or do the two together, or?
I think it goes down to learning your pitch. I think there's no right way of doing it. Obviously, preferably you'd always cut first, but if you're in a situation and you're on a Friday afternoon and it's before a match on a Saturday or Sunday, and you can only do one, you've got to look at the weather forecast coming for the next few days.
Where are they?
And also look at how you want to present your pitch for the team involved playing that day. So I think it's a very case of taking each day as it comes, and when you arrive at your pitch, you look at the pitch, and you'll know what the pitch needs when you learn the pitch, and you're on it every day, and it'll just come to you. You think, I'll slit that today. I'm not getting cut that today. I'll just put the slitter over it. It's forecast nice couple of days. Get some air into it, or we might have some rain coming over the weekend, so we can get the slitter into it, so we can get the water moving through the profile a little bit more. So but obviously, if it's summertime and the growth is, I'd always try and slit when you're not. If you were cutting on a Friday, I'd try and slit on a Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, so it's got the longest time available, so the ground's open.
Yeah.
And would it be right in thinking, just in terms of the calendar year, that slitting is an operation generally carried out more from the autumn to spring window, and less so obviously in the summer months? Or would you keep going all the way through the summer if the ground conditions and the weather allowed?
Yeah, you can carry on, to be honest with you, because it doesn't just do aeration, it does what's called root pruning as well. It helps with your thatch layers, so it's beneficial if you can get them sheet. What you tend to get there in the summertime when the pitches start going hard because of the moisture levels is your spike probably won't go that far into the ground, and you might cause more damage to the machine and the actual pitch. So it's a very defined line when you go on there, to be honest.
Thanks both. And then I know we've touched upon this previously, but the next question in terms of when is the best time to sow seed, we think back to 2 or 3 summers ago when we're conscious a lot of clubs, not just in our county but I'm sure around the country, sowed seed just before we had one of the hottest summers ever for about the next 12 weeks. So given a reasonably fair calendar year, is it a case of doing a little bit in the spring and then saving some seed back till the end of the summer, or is there a definitive answer to that question, or is it very much weather dependent?
It's kind of all of the above almost, and as I say, it almost comes back to, if I know I'm going to batter my pitches from now until the end of June, then again, as I said earlier on, I don't want to play all my cards now, so I'm going to stagger it. And also, I think with this question, the reference there, it implies that across the pitch there are sparse areas, and for no apparent reason, some areas are just better than others. So at some point, we're probably going to want to try and get seed into the whole pitch. So for the minute, I'm probably going to want to concentrate on the high wear areas, I think. So some of you may have heard me comment or read my kind of standard view on this, which is width for the 6-yard box through the length of the pitch. That might be my starting point, and then as I kind of start to get to a point where I'm being a bit more intensive, it could be the width for the penalty box through the length of the pitch. And I'm obviously assuming in that my wings are reasonably intact, but of course they might not be. So yeah, Gareth, it's difficult to be completely definitive, but I don't, I'm not going to play my whole hand now. That's I guess the summary.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up to that, and I know we've touched on this in previous workshops, if the budget did permit you as a club to seed your whole pitch, what's the recommended ratio in terms of the number of bags of seed for example, a full-size 11-a-side pitch? And would you then do that in percentage in terms of putting it on early and saving some till late? But I suppose first of all, just for the clubs who are thinking of going down that route or employing a contractor to seed their pitch, what is the amount of bags you'd recommend for example, 11-a-side pitch?
It depends on obviously the wear and tear, what you've got throughout the pitch, but I think the pitches where we've gone round, I think the minimum is 10 to 12 bags, to be honest, because you want to get a dominant ryegrass sward in there. I think most pitches by the end of the season, like Kevin says, there's like a triangle of wear on the pitch, and through the centre of the pitch, 6-yard to 6-yard box, and across the pitch 10 yards either side of the halfway line is the main wear areas. You probably lose most of your seed in those kind of areas, to be honest. So it's important that you get those areas seeded at the recommended rates, around 35 grams, 40 grams a square metre, to be honest.
Super. No, thank you very much. Okay, obviously very topical in terms of today's announcements, but what should we be doing if grassroots football restarts in March, which obviously we now know it can do at the end of March and extends through to May or June? And for those who are unaware, the FA have put out a statement at 7 p.m. this evening confirming that grassroots football below the National League system can be played until the end of June. So Some leagues may wish to take that into account now with whatever plans they may have for playing some form of football through to the end of June. So I suppose the question is, if leagues are potentially playing to the end of June, it's going to give clubs a very small renovation window before pre-season starts for next year. So I know it's a lot of ifs, buts and maybes in that question, Kevin and Andy, but what essentially can clubs do with a smaller renovation window?
I think it's a case of just doing similar things, but just doing them more often. If you can do, if you've got your own equipment, which a lot of the sites have, if you've got rakes and things, this is what I touched on first of all. I think I'd be certainly doing a lot of hygiene going into the spring, and then I'd be looking at seeding the pitches before sort of peak summer, putting a bit of seed on. Then maybe around August time, you've probably played on the pitches quite a lot then, so maybe do a little bit more surface hygiene, bit of raking, and then overseed again. But it's quite critical for me that when you're overseeding, that people use the right machinery as well, making sure that the seed's put on, planted into the ground by using something like a Vido machine, because I think the accuracy, John probably will correct me on this, but it's around 98% germination. So, and if you were spending X amount of money on grass seed, it's important that you use the right machinery to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Any additional thoughts on that one, Kevin?
I'd certainly agree with Andy's points. I'd still be looking to undertake my weed control, and it depends on my budget and other bits and bobs, but I mean, I might think about combining that with a liquid feed as well, just to, I was talking about giving it a sort of little boost.
Yeah.
That might be quite a neat way of doing it. Obviously, with my weed control, I've got to think fairly carefully. If I'm doing extensive overseeding, then I'm going to have to allow a bit of time before I do my weed control. I speak to quite a lot of people, obviously, and there is a view that says wait for the clover to turn up in June. That's the last weed of the season, then do it. Is kind of one philosophy, and maybe this year that might not be a bad approach. But so it does require a little bit of phasing, a little bit of planning. But I think, as Andy said, we're probably going to be, it's almost doing quite a lot of the operations, but doing them less intensively and more often, to be honest. And of course, as for those of you who heard Andy Salt's comment, first and foremost, we've kind of got to get the mowing under control. That's probably going to be our immediate priority. I think, you always start getting nervous when it starts to look a bit tufty, and you can see the leaves blowing. That's going to say for grass leaves blowing in the wind, and you're thinking, "Oh, this could be a bit tricky." So, those would be my kind of comments, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of planning as well, and I know some of the sites we've done quite detailed planning with sort of Rigby Taylor as well, because there's quite a few sites using the growth regulators as well now. So it's very important that we time putting those kind of products on with overseeding as well. And fertilizer. So I do think that people will need a bit of advice and help going forward in sort of planning some of the fertilizer programs, what they're doing, and the seeding dates, which we can help with.
Super, thanks both. And the last question on this slide possibly links in a little bit to some of the previous answers, that those football clubs that do have multi-pitch on site, obviously we're aware of 2 or 3 sites, very close turnaround between football and cricket. Any different answers when they're potentially dealing with obviously a cricket outfield as well?
I think this year the key thing is going to be planning and collaboration between the football and cricket sections, because you'd often get a bit of overlap, but obviously this year it's going to be very, very different. And there is guidance on managing dual sports sites, and we can kind of make that available, but it's going to be really very tricky because, you know, cricket outfields are going to be, the cricket section are going to be wanting an outfield that's probably down to about 18 millimeters, and which is a bit on the short. Yeah, it's actually very short from a football point of view, but it might be, we will have to work with them to try and work out something that's agreeable for for both sports. So that's a difficult one to be specific on because every site is different, as are the age groups.
Yeah, super, thank you. Okay, Kevin, we'll move on to the last few questions that we had in advance. I think the next two, Kevin and Andy, we can probably give you a little bit of a break, but thank you very much for answering all those questions in detail. Kevin Staples and I will attempt to answer these next two. In terms of the first one, is funding still available for clubs wishing to invest in pitch maintenance machinery, and if so, what percentage is available? Yes, the good news is there is funding available from the Football Foundation for clubs to invest in the recommended machinery within their reports, and that has been extended in recent times to 75%. So we're conscious from when we started our programme, we had a lot of clubs who were recommended machinery, which in reality they couldn't afford without a great deal of fundraising. The great news now is obviously with that figure now being at 75%, hopefully that makes some of these machinery investments a lot more achievable. So yes, in answer to that question, good news, funding is available. There isn't a window on machinery funding. That is currently available all year round. The only caveat is that for the Football Foundation to invest in machinery for a club, it must be recommended by the pitch advisor, and it must come from a reputable source. So if you haven't already got a pitch report with the recommended machinery in, or if circumstances have changed since your original report was produced, it will be a case of getting a report or getting an updated report from Andy or Kevin that backs up the most appropriate machinery for your site. But the last one from me on that, and I'll hand over to Kevin Staples for any additional comments. I know a lot of clubs in the past that, things like a compact tractor and an additional roller mower have been out of reach. Hopefully this 75% fund makes that achievable, and also the opportunity over the next few years to add attachments such as we mentioned the quadruplay earlier, slitters, spikers, etc. So hopefully some good news on the percentage front funding for those that were unaware. Kevin Staples, have I missed anything on that one? And I'll let you answer the next one as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, Gareth. Thank you. No, I think you covered everything from a machinery fund point of view. It does fund new and second-hand machinery. So if the budget is a little bit tighter, you can look at second-hand machinery as well. And obviously, the guys at Campy and others can advise on that where needs be. And like Gareth suggested, you can now start to build up a bit of an equipment bank. You can go back year after year, month after month, even if you wanted to help with your machinery. Obviously appreciate funds might be a little bit tighter than the way before, but potentially now there's an option over the next 2, 3, 4 years for clubs to build up a good selection of equipment that they can use on their sites. As Gaz said, definitely needs to be recommended by Kevin or Andy in our instance, and as well as that, as much more work comes through the Pitch Power apps and how that evolves as well, I'm sure the details of those reports will get more specific as well to the requirements of each site. So it's been a fund that we've utilised really well. Clubs in the county have utilised really well from day one, really. So we want to continue that where we can. So just give us a heads up if you're looking at any machinery requirements, and we can support with that. And yeah, just answer the next question. So a number of the clubs on the call this evening have experience of this, but there is funding available to support the maintenance and improvement of grass pitches now. This was something that was introduced at the very start of last year. So we've kind of had a year of where we've really not had the chance to see how this plays out from a more sort of hands-on perspective. It's all been kind of, there's the funding, and the clubs have been have to sort of get on it with themselves, unfortunately, due to the circumstances. But hopefully those clubs that have had the funding, they've made the most of it. This is known as the Enhanced Pitch Maintenance Grant, whereby clubs can draw down funding per pitch to support contracted service employment, essentially. So it doesn't include cutting or marking, but anything else that potentially is required to a certain level, clubs can draw down funding for. So again, linked to clubs' pitch improvement and moving forward pitch power assessment reports, clubs can either access new money to help them put those contracted services in place, all the things that we spoke about, slitting, fertilisation, seeding, etc., etc. And then that process happens over a 6-year period. So the funding is there for 6 years. Again, with the clubs in the county have embraced that really well. Had a real good opportunity to try and draw down as much money as we can with that, and we want to continue to do that for those clubs who haven't had the opportunity yet to do so. The fund, as I said, is down to per pitch. So whether you've got 1 pitch or 12 pitches on your site, you can have funding per pitch. But I say it just have to come with the recommendations as per the pitch advisors. For any sites or clubs that are on the call tonight, you haven't or weren't aware of that, or haven't yet had the opportunity to look into it, the fund is currently closed. It was closed at the back end of last year while a review of the fund was put in place, but we are reliably informed that it is ready to be rolled out again under the same conditions. However, due to the current conditions, obviously needing to go out and do pitch power assessments, etc., the fund will be released when restrictions allow. So now we know that is looking at the end of this month. We expect that we'll see that towards the end of this month and into the early parts of April. So hopefully that's an opportunity for people to apply straight away. We'll take Kevin and Andy's advice on what we need to do, because obviously we're conscious of times of the essence if people want to do something for the start of the year or start of the renovation period, so to speak. So we need to have a look at that one quite quickly. But provided you own your own site or have a lease or a license, or the site owner is prepared to give you a service level agreement that you can manage your pitches, then you should be eligible with a couple of our criteria. But please give us a shout after this meeting or in the next couple of days if you're interested in that and haven't accessed it already.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think we've had a question come up around funding in the chat as well, so we shall cover that as well shortly.
Okay.
Just before we move on to the next one, something sprung to my mind. I think it was the last workshop we had in terms of the machinery. Now that clubs can access a reasonable percentage, I remember a club asking that if they could now invest in the machinery that they could do in-house, would we recommend that the jobs that clubs do in-house essentially would be the mowing, the marking, and if they've got a slitter or a quadruplay, those regular tasks, and then save their budget for the one-off or 2 or 3 off hits a year for the contractors? So, for example, deep aeration, overseeding, etc. Would that still be the message, Kevin and Andy, that if clubs can afford to get machinery to do their mowing in-house and some regular slitting or brushing if they've got a quadruplay, for example, and then save their budget? I know it will be very much dependent on the size of the site, etc. But for grassroots clubs, does that sound like a reasonable way forward in terms of the balance between their own machinery and investing in contractors?
Yeah, definitely. I think what you've got to remember is the contractors and the machinery they use, they're very experienced in doing it, and it can be quite tricky in getting the right amount of seed down with the seeders. The aeration machines, the verti drains, the shock waves, they aren't 5-10 minute jobs. They take a few hours rather than, and if someone's verti drained the pitch in 3 or 4 hours, they haven't done a proper job. So I think with the specialist machinery, it is sometimes better to leave it to the contractors until you've got sort of the knowledge and the expertise and moving up to that. To be honest, especially on the big sites, to get vertidrain a whole site can take you 2 to 3 weeks, and that's some volunteer hours, that is.
Yeah. No, super. Okay, we shall move on to the last 3 questions then before having a look to see what's coming on the chat. So if we only have enough funding to deep aerate our site once a year, what time of year would you recommend that operation takes place?
For me, Kevin, I don't, depending on the soil profile, Kevin, I'd be looking at sort of just before the autumn time, wouldn't you?
I certainly would. Almost to the point where I often say to clubs, think in terms of that October half term.
Yeah.
And you probably won't be a million miles away. Last year was all right. It's probably worth saying that 2019 you wouldn't have been all right because it was so wet. But generally speaking, that's what I would be. There's a sort of sweet spot towards the end of September, just early October. You don't want to leave it too late, and that's what I'd shoot for. And I'd be looking at linear deep aeration, so I'd be looking at shock waving type method. That time of the year.
Yeah. That reference to linear aeration, Kevin, leads us nicely into the next question. That if a club can afford to deep aerate twice a year, do you recommend that the summer renovation is a vertidrain and the linear shockwave in the autumn?
I certainly go linear in the autumn, and and that's because I'm trying to create some fissures to sort of ease any surface water away. And it's also, I think you can more or less sort of play on it straight afterwards. It's I guess a bit neater. The challenge with linear deep aeration in the sort of as a soil starts to dry is if you've got a very, very heavy soil and you linear deep aerate, then you can end up with cracking. So it's a sort of it's a judgmental thing. It's a sort of all to do with timing and everything else. And again, if you're going to combine deep aeration with top dressing, then you might be better off going with vertical deep aeration or a vertidrain. I think that spring one is quite site specific. What would you say to that, Andy?
I think if you could do both, I'd definitely do that. I'd do me vertidraining when I was doing my summer renovation. If I was lucky enough to have some top dressing, I'd certainly be applying the top dressing and vertidraining, and then trying to brush some of the top dressing into the holes. And because if you did that regularly, you'd sort of make more of a sandy profile at the top, obviously over a period of time. But definitely, it's the definite way round to do it, the vertidraining sort of through the summer months. But also, you've got to be very careful as well, because in the summer months, if it goes really dry, you won't get the full effects of the vertidrain. So, please make sure that there is some certain amount of moisture in the ground, because you won't get the full effects of the vertidrain. And the same can be said with the shockwave. If there's too much moisture in the ground, you don't get the full effects of the shockwave neither. So everything's very dependent on the weather and the moisture in the soil.
Super. Yeah. Thanks both. Okay, and last question on here before we have a look at the chat. So I'll try and summarise it, but with no football played on our pitches for the last 3 months, in addition to the very wet weather, our pitches look and feel like they require rolling, as the playing surface feels uneven. After advice of not to roll pitches, which compacts the surface, what would be the advice as the first activity to carry out, as I should be able to get some lighter machinery back to do some maintenance shortly? So got a couple of questions in there, but I suppose the first one, in terms of the reference to the pitches looking like they may need rolling, what would your initial thoughts be on that?
I'd be hoping they've got a rotary roller mower, because I've got my job done. I've got my 2 operations in one there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's why we do recommend rotary roller mowers, so much, because you're getting a double whammy. So if I haven't, my next step, I'm going to think about, slitting it will settle it down quite neatly. And if I got a grass care combination system, so something like a quadruplay, then I'm there as well, because the roller on is designed to lightly roll in conjunction with the slitter, in this particular instance, and that'll do the job for me. I think, because we do get nervous about rolling, and it's a reference to, you've all seen it, or most of you have, where there's this very large agricultural roller that's stuck in the corner of the site that's sort of overgrown. And some bright spark every now and again will suggest that we retrieve it from the hedge and run it over the pitches. So it's the heavy rolling that we're trying to advise clubs against undertaking, because it'll look great, but it does add quite a lot to the compaction. And the next time it rains, it'll be great for ducks, not much else.
Yeah, super. No, thank you very much both for that, and hopefully we've covered all of those questions in a reasonable amount of detail, both for the individuals who asked them, but everybody else that has an interest in some of those issues that other clubs have. As I mentioned earlier, if for any reason your question hasn't been answered in as much detail as you'd like, or if it's generated some additional questions, then please feel free to drop me an email, and I can liaise with Andy and Kevin with regards to getting some initial feedback on any issues that you do currently have. Okay, we'll move on to. I'm very conscious that we said we'd try and keep this to an hour, and we've snuck over. So I'll go through the chat now, and when we've done that, if it's not too late, we'll offer the opportunity for people to ask questions verbally. But in terms of what has come in so far on the chat this evening, okay, first one, and this is for Kevin, regarding Gareth's comments about some of the educational establishments coming on board with Football Foundation pitch power maintenance funding. Do we know which schools these are and who might be a good person to contact in order to collate any good ideas around persuading the folk at that college to that it is a good project? So I think obviously that's Charlie from Tamworth, in terms of a club who are based on an educational site, who are conscious that as a club can access funding to improve the school pitches, but only if the school come on board, which to probably all of us on this call seems a no-brainer, because the school are going to benefit from football funding improving their pitches. But I think Charlie, I'm right in saying, can we share with you where examples of this has worked in other areas of the county? Kevin Staples, is that one potentially that we go back to, Charlie, away from this forum, or one that you're happy to cover now?
Yeah, we'll look to support Charlie on his individual case, but the schools giving away, so to speak, their land, their assets is always a tricky one. They don't have to do that. They don't have to give leases, and I know some schools probably can't give leases. Definitely can't give the freehold away for their land because of various educational, but also Secretary of State kind of level decisions that need to be made. But that's the reason for around pitch funding. There's a service level agreement whereby hopefully a partnership can be created, because as you said, if the pitches are going to improve for the club and league at weekends, then they're definitely going to improve for the school and their players and staff during the weekday. We've had a couple of clubs who've got those agreements in place, and I know there are other schools who are probably just oblivious to the fact that these things can be put in place. So I think it's about talking to them and finding out what the solution for both parties is. And we found as well over the last couple of years in particular, obviously budgets, etc., are reducing for those kind of things for schools, unfortunately. So if we can help with that, then even better. But yeah, we'll pick that one up separately with Charlie, and anybody else who does use a school site or knows of a school site that is open to community and recreational use, then please let us know, because it's definitely a conversation worth having. Thanks,
Kevin. And I think this was probably when we were talking about the grass growing earlier. Andy Salt mentioned growth reg, and I know it's had a lot of success with that. Probably one for you, Andy Jackson, just to touch upon the benefits, the pros and cons of a growth regulator.
Yeah, I think in terms of Andy, where we were with Andy, was I think that was year 3 or maybe year 4, I can't remember now, and it does transform. It's sort of the last bit of the piece of the jigsaw, really. What you got to remember with growth regulators is people get frightened by the cost of them, but actually they save you a hell of a lot of money, and 2, that they do so much. You get better rooting, you get a thicker sward, you apply slightly less fertilizer. There's so much behind. You don't need to mark your pitches out as much. There's a massive benefit of them, but you do have to put a structure in place to get the best out of them, which is a detailed fertilizer plan. The timing of them is very key. And it's something we can help with. I think we've recommended it to quite a few sites, and I'm pretty sure that myself, Glenn at Rigby Taylors, Gareth and Kevin will help as many people as we can. I'm sure the help's there, and we'll help sites to do that.
No, thanks, Andy. And yeah, it's always good when there's a live case study as well, which obviously we've got a couple of now in the county. Next one, possibly one for you again, Kevin Staples. Maybe I'll transfer it from Chris at Brilliant Social. If there is another pitch preparation fund in July, is it too late? It needs to start earlier. I know there's a lot going on at the moment around some of the grants. What's potentially the best way of summarising that one, Kevin, in terms of where we're currently at with the funding schemes?
I'm not aware that there'll be any further kind of ad hoc funds, so to speak, like the club or the pitch prep funds that were available last year, because obviously trying to come out the other side of this now. I guess the only reason that might come into place if things take a turn for the worst and we go back to any type of lockdown or period of time when we can't get on the pitches and people can't bring in income, etc. So that's always one to keep an eye on. Things like the Winter Survival Fund that was talked about for ages for National League football was coming, then it didn't, etc. And it came and went away. We've heard of other funds being discussed, but then things changed because of what happened through government, etc. So that unfortunately, I think, is one that we'll only ever know if and when the worst happens again, and it won't happen. We won't probably get much notice of it either. But the enhanced pitch maintenance grant that I spoke about before, will be hopefully coming back, and will that be more structured, because it will be that everlasting grant, sort of 6 to 10 year process that we have to put in place.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and there'll be more information coming out around that, particularly some of the sites that had pitch preparation grants during COVID as well. So hopefully some good news on the horizon, whether it be the short term or slightly longer term for all sites, whatever shape or size in the county. Moving on a little bit, thanks Andy for Jackson, bit of interaction on there, just to gauge how many people were planning on top dressing their pitches this summer. Any reason, Andy, you pitched that question just in terms of top dressing?
Yeah, depending on what the club's going to do. So I was talking earlier about doing, and Kevin was talking about doing little and often. But if you've only got one chance to top dress, it's going to be a very important when to do that. If, depending on your sward density, if your sward's quite thin going into summer, I'd probably be doing it early summer. If the sward's quite thick, I'd be looking at, and you've got quite a bit of thatch there, I'd be still looking at getting some of the thatch out throughout the summer, just little and often. And then probably top dressing around August time. You don't want to leave it too late, though. You don't want to be doing it in October, but I'd certainly say August, start of September, with a little bit of seed, it'd be good. So, like I say, just monitor your thatch layers first.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andy. And then in terms of the question around finding someone to apply it. So again, with all of the contracting operations that club may wish to invest in, we're growing our knowledge base of local contractors in and around the Staffordshire area. So wherever you are in Staffordshire, please give us a shout if you need some information on the details of local contractors that can help you carry out works. Okay, let's see. Question around equipment, possibly one for yourself, Kevin Staples. Can equipment part exchange be used for machinery funding, and would it cover the 25% club contribution? So I assume that question is a site wishing to invest in new machinery, of which they obviously need to find 25%. Can part exchange equipment be included as that 25%? I think I know the answer to that, Kevin, but are you happy to touch up on that one?
I think we'll need to double check on it, but I believe if it's equipment that's already been funded, say it was funded 2 or 3 years ago by the Football Foundation, for example, and they want to part exchange that, I don't believe that will be acceptable because of the previous investment that was made. If it's exchanging machinery that was brought without investment, then I think we need to ask the question on that one. If whoever that is asking the question, guys, sorry I can't see it, could or we just keep hold of it and we'll do some digging on it for you and get the right answer.
Yeah, no, it's one from Clive, so we can pick that up after the meeting on a case-by-case basis. Okay, Andy, you've touched upon I think this already in terms of would clubs like help around fertiliser and growth regulator schedules. So again, perhaps that's something we could cover in more detail at future workshops possibly, but Andy, Kevin, any additional thoughts around plans for fertiliser in general?
Could I just whack one up on the screen just so people can look at it?
Yeah, sorry, that's Glenn from Rigby Taylor. Are you able to do that, Glenn, from your end?
I think so. I'll try
You're a clever man, Glenn.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, the text is a bit small, but yeah, we can see the gist of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is from Shrewsbury Town Football Club, so it's basic for a professional football club, but probably more than what obviously these guys would do. But you can see, obviously, we got the months along the top. Obviously, got week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4 down the side. So that's telling you what to do when. Obviously, we got fertilisers in there, liquid feeds, grass seed, telling them when to do the renovation, different bits and bobs. But we could also build into that when to do your aeration, when to do your spiking, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's perhaps something that Andy could use to give clubs, and we can do it as well as Andy.
Super. No, that's just looking at the chat, Glenn. We've got quite a few people in response to Andy's questions. I think would appreciate some sort of plan. Conscious that this is obviously a lot more detailed, Shrewsbury Town, but as you've touched upon, we know that you've done these plans for clubs of all shapes and sizes. So again, something we can look to tailor for each individual site based on size, budgets, etc.
Yeah, definitely.
Super. No, thank you very much for that, Glenn. Kevin, are you able to take us back to the slides if possible?
Bear with me, I'll have a go.
And just while you're doing that, I think this is the last question on the chat, and then we'll just invite people to pop their hands up should they want to ask something before the end of the evening. What would you recommend machinery-wise for a club that has none? So essentially, what would be your starting items, Andy and Kevin, if a club were just embarking on investing in their own machinery? Where do they start, and then where do they go from there?
I think grass cutting is number one. Kevin, what do you say?
I would, yeah.
So
was this John at
yeah, this is John at Madeley.
Yeah.
So just using that the size of that site, Kevin,
Yeah.
which you're familiar with, I assume, not wanting to put words in your mouth, but would this fall into the category of compact tractor roller mower?
It would. So compact tractor, sort of 28 to 34 horsepower, might get away with slightly less, but it's a reasonably big site, so we wouldn't want to skimp too much on that. Rotary roller mower, probably minimum width 1.9, and grass care combination system, so the sort of quadruple play or equivalent, and obviously you're into questions then around storage and that kind of stuff, but yeah, it would be that kind of configuration.
No, thanks, Kevin. And that's a question that comes up a lot and has done over the years. And I think if we had a magic wand and we could almost give every site a compact tractor, a roller mower, and that combination tool that Kevin touched upon, i.e. the quadruplay, I think there's enough there for clubs to be able to maintain their pitches to a good standard. And then if there is any additional budget left over to be able to invest in external contractors, then even better. But hopefully that answers the question, and hopefully now with the percentage of funding available, that gives clubs something to work towards. And also storage was mentioned there. Storage can also be included within the funding application. So if a club doesn't have storage container or secure storage for their equipment, then the storage elements of the project can also be funded to 75% as well. And just on that, if people do or are thinking of going down that route, we've got some reasonably good links now with some local container companies. So again, if you wanted any advice on storage for your machinery, then please ask us the question. Just to follow up from John, thank you, Circa, for, I assume, in terms of the cost for a compact tractor, a roller mower and the quadruplay. I don't have the figures to hand. I don't know if John is on the call or not. I'll certainly share that information.
I mean, I was just going to say that, because Campy's quote a lot, not just in Staffordshire, but right across my region. So have basically a kind of, a ready-made package of precisely that for grassroots clubs. So I'm sure John will be, more than happy to give John Bailey some indicative costs.
Yeah, and I think pricing obviously changes, and of course the horsepower of the tractor will obviously dictate the cost. I think, and don't quote me on this because I may be wrong, but I think some time ago a club who invested in a compact tractor roller mower quadruplay, I think the project cost came to around about 24k for the 3 items, which meant they had to find 6 and obviously got funded 18. I may be wrong on those prices, and they may have increased since then, so apologies if I am, but just as a ballpark figure, John, at Madeley, hopefully that gives you a rough indication as to potentially what sort of funding you may need to find in terms of your 25%. But I will come back for any clubs who are looking for information and specific figures. Please get in touch with us and we can share that information with you. Okay, last couple I think that are coming in. So possibly one for Kevin Staples, Kieran at Midlands Soccer Academy. What security measures are required when storing the machinery? So in terms of the Football Foundation requirements, Kevin, what do they insist on from a storage point of view? And it's followed up, shipping containers ideal. I think I'm right in saying that shipping containers are fundable, aren't they?
Yeah, correct. So anything really, really robust and solid, like a shipping container or a brick building that you've already got, anything like that. Obviously, things like wooden sheds, those type of things, just a no-go. So yeah, majority, if not all, of the funding applications that we supported have been for shipping containers to store the equipment. Obviously, it's just checking the size of the machine to make sure it fits, if that's the case. But John's got all those dimensions again from the machinery needs.
Super. Well, thank you very much for that, Kevin, and Andy. Hopefully, we've covered the questions that came in the chat in reasonable detail. Obviously, a lot of interaction there around the fertiliser schedule, so that's something we'll discuss internally off the back of this meeting, with a view to looking to get something out to you. I'm conscious that it is 9 o'clock, and we promise not to keep you all night. But that's pretty much it from myself, other than just some final thoughts. But before we get on to them, does anybody want to ask any questions? Which it doesn't look like we have. So either that means we've either covered everything, or people are dying for a brew, or to go and do something else this evening. So I shall move on to the final thoughts. Again, please follow the government guidance in terms of what we can and can't do over the coming weeks and months, and we will keep sharing information from both the Football Association and the Grounds Management Association to support clubs with that. Do embrace the GMA and the Football Foundation resources, as I say, both for yourselves and also for any other volunteers within the club. It's a great way of continuing to gain further knowledge in this area. We'll forward on a recording of tonight's meeting to everyone, along with a copy of the slides and anything else that's relevant that's been brought up this evening. As I say, keep in touch. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can start thinking about some face-to-face workshops, but in the meantime, do keep in touch, keep networking. The groundskeeping community on Hive is very active 24 hours a day, so there's some good interaction on there, some good tips from not just GMA staff but also professional groundkeepers in the industry as well. And if you found tonight useful, as I say, whilst we did add a bit of structure to tonight in terms of some slides, etc., it wouldn't obviously be too much trouble to organise regular Q&A sessions where the four of us could ultimately come online for half an hour or an hour or so every now and again, as literally a drop-in session for any specific questions that anybody has. So if you did find tonight useful and you think something very informal like this might be useful on a regular basis, where you can just dip in for 5-10 minutes, ask a question and log off, then it's something we potentially could look to set up on a more regular basis to keep in touch. So again, any feedback on that, let us know, and perhaps that's something that we could dovetail with some face-to-face sessions. And just on that, as I say, when we can get back to it, we are very keen to start delivering practical sessions again, particularly now that we've formalised our partnerships with the likes of Campy and Rigby Taylor and Dennis and Sysis. We can add some real value to some of those sessions. So hopefully we can get back face to face in the not too distant future. And any questions that you think about after we've logged off tonight or over the coming days that springs to mind, or over the coming weeks as we get closer to kick-off date, then please drop us a line, and hopefully between the four of us and the partners we can help you out in the short term. And as always, any feedback is always welcome, good, bad or indifferent, in terms of the programme, in terms of what the workshops we deliver. Obviously we try and keep it fresh, and we're conscious that we have people who've been involved now for 7-8 years, and people who are joining programme for the very first time. So it's a fine balancing act sometimes, not to be too repetitive to people who've been involved for a long time, whilst also keeping it as fresh as we possibly can. But yeah, any future thoughts for content, then please do let us know. And finally, from me, just a big thank you, really. Firstly, to my colleague Kevin and Kevin Duffel, and also Andy Jackson for their support with tonight. Obviously, we had to have a couple of planning meetings to try and sort this out. So I'm very grateful for your time. I know how busy everybody is at the moment. So thank you very much, as always, for supporting the programme. And a big thank you to everyone who's logged in this evening, not only for giving up your time this evening, but thank you for the work that you continue to do at a grassroots level, not just during COVID, but in many cases for many, many years. And I think, you know, we will all agree that whilst we all want as many people playing football as possible, if we don't have good quality natural turf surfaces, then people simply will either not be able to play football, or their enjoyment of the game will be less. So the role that everybody on this call makes is absolutely crucial to making sure that grassroots football can thrive when we come out of lockdown. So a huge thank you to everything that you've all done over what's been a difficult period, and hopefully we can all get back to it very soon. And then just the last slide, please, Kevin, just in case anybody doesn't have the contact details. There's the generic Staffordshire FA email address there, which is monitored all of the time. Myself and Kevin, although we've obviously got a few issues at the moment around furlough, we generally are checking emails most days, and we'll try and come back to you as soon as we possibly can. And obviously there's a link to our website. But we've touched upon the Grounds Management Association. They've got fantastic social media. Hopefully ours is not too bad either in terms of the pitch maintenance stuff we keep trying to share. But thank you again for this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing everybody again, hopefully in person very soon. So thank you for your time, everyone. Have a pleasant rest of the evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.